Thank you, everyone. It is so good to be here this afternoon. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Niman homa, nede homa, annyeonghaseyo. It's just wonderful to be here. I'm going to share screen because I prepared a little presentation for you today. So give me a second. One moment, please. There, can you see that? Can you see this? Is it showing on the screen? Good.
Indeed, indeed.
So this year marked my 10th anniversary as your Bishop Suffragan. As I reflected on the last 10 years, all of the visitations, confirmations, walkabouts, lunches, meetings, planning, forming new bonds and relationships, I started thinking about the years ahead. The pandemic has offered us an opportunity to start rethinking not only how we do ministry, but how we reach people to share the good news of God and Christ as servants of the Spirit. I'm excited by the energy that comes from responding to something new. But I'm also very aware of the undercurrent of weariness and worry that accompanies the kind of dramatic change that we've all been thrust into. So my remarks to you at this 125th Diocesan Convention will touch on the ways the Spirit is moved through the Diocese of Los Angeles, and we have worked together to be servants of the Spirit, especially in the areas of virtual worship, stewardship, new community ministry, compensation, and visitations. As the pandemic hit us like a tsunami coming in after a bad storm, we were all shut down. Quickly, we all realized that the most important thing we needed to do in the short term was to connect with members of our communities. You all did that in congregations you were involved with. We at the diocese did that by reaching out to the clergy. The pandemic, why does it do that? There I go. Oh no, I got ahead of myself. The pandemic forced us to move online to connect. Congregations, for the most part, were able to be nimble and pivot to online worship with ups and downs in the process and great learnings as you went along. Mission and ministry continued. Indeed, it was significantly more important due to the increased needs within our communities. Across the board, you all stepped up, from your reaching out to your membership, to seeing the needs of the community around you and being servants of the Spirit by feeding and caring for those most in need spiritually and physically. Thank you. You were all able to be up and running and make Holy Week and Easter sacred by your presence online. Thank you for that. People are hungry for the good news of God and Christ, and you are feeding them. People are connecting with you from outside the diocese and outside of your own parochial boundaries, and they're staying. Continuing with some form of hybrid worship, meaning online and in person when we are through this pandemic, will be critical in helping those who have found us continue to be part of our communities of faith. Christian formation and new member incorporation in a digital platform will be critical in our work in the future. Now, I am particularly interested in developing a blooper roll for posterity of some of the funny moments captured of you all live streamed. Normally, when those moments happen in the church, and they do, we don't have them captured digitally. So keep sending me those bloopers. As we watch the days and weeks pass with longer and longer time out of your church and school buildings, your program group on stewardship knew we had to take a new and hard look at how stewardship can and should be done during and after this pandemic time. Given our long-standing relationship with the Episcopal Network on Stewardship, otherwise known as TENS, we introduced ourselves to the new head of TENS, Davy Gerhardt, and a development partnership was formed. We literally built the plane as we were flying it. We knew a few things out the gate from talking with you all during the first weeks of this pandemic. The maintenance of relationships within the congregation and continually reaching out and connecting was critical in meeting the immediate pastoral needs of the community. Congregations especially needed to figure out a way to continue receiving pledges and gifts. This necessitated the introduction of various platforms for online giving. Websites and stream services needed to include the ability to receive pledges and especially gifts of those who were searching for an anchor or in this sea of pandemic confusion. Knowing that many of our in-person fundraisers could not be done in the same way due to COVID, the introduction of virtual galas and fundraisers became critical as one of our offerings. The development of traditional as well as virtual/hybrid stewardship platforms were done cooperatively between the Diocese of Los Angeles and TENS. The Spirit certainly was alive, well, and moving fast through us as we undertook all this work. The result was the offerings made to the diocese, which are available to you on the diocesan website under stewardship. Coming up for 2021, we are again partnering with TENS to develop a hybrid and online year-round stewardship process. The program group on stewardship is here to help you. Feel free to contact us. Let us know what's working for you, what's not working, and let's continue to work together to address the stewardship needs of your congregation and this Episcopal Church. In the new community, formerly known as Multicultural Ministry, we began the year strong with the program group on Black ministry in conjunction with the H. Belfield Hannibal chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians, offering our annual celebration of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., hosted at Holy Faith in Inglewood. We, later in the year, celebrated the installation of new officers into our UBE chapter in a virtual service. All the Asian American communities of the diocese came together for the Episcopal Asiamerica Ministry, otherwise known as EAM, New Year's service, held at St. Thomas in Hacienda Heights. The Diocesan Chinese Convocation offered the annual Chinese New Year's service hosted by St. Gabriel's in Monterey Park. And now here, the gathering, a space for Asiamerica Pacific Islander spirituality, hosted an Asian American leadership retreat at St. Paul's Commons. Working together with East, Episcopal Asian Supper Table headquartered in the Diocese of New York, the leadership conference welcomed over 40 Asian American leaders from 10 different dioceses to Los Angeles. In addition, Immersion Experiences 2.0 to introduce Chinese and Korean culture were offered. We started this critical work last year, and we're looking forward to continue this work with more in-depth introduction into our congregations whose demographics are changing to understand people that God is bringing to their neighborhoods. There's more to come in 2021. We continued at the beginning of 2020 to gather as heads of the various new community groups and to continue our common work of not only learning together, but helping our community learn and grow. Then COVID-19 dominated the news, and the lives of the new community leadership and congregations began to change. In February, an offering by the gathering on Won't You Be My Neighbor, a panel conversation on racism and microaggression against Asians was offered. In the beautiful backdrop of the Church of Our Savior in San Gabriel, in my brief remarks, I noted that I would be traveling to Korea and Taiwan in the next week, and that already in the United States, we were seeing not microaggression, but aggression against Asians and our communities. The gathering went on to offer more opportunities to gather for fellowship and learning events. These continued throughout the year, and more are being planned for 2021, thanks to a very generous grant the gathering received from the Episcopal Church. In traveling to Korea, I was able to continue the good relationship we have with the Anglican Church there, preaching at the cathedral in Seoul, listening to and reflecting with the women clergy. There are no women bishops in Korea yet. Everyone was masked. Everyone was careful in public. In private, we did take off our masks. The same was true in Taiwan, where I represented the Diocese of Los Angeles at our Episcopal Church in Taiwan's consecration of their new bishop, Lenin Chang. Within days after my return, we were all on stay-at-home orders here in the diocese. My friends, the shutting down of businesses greatly impacted so many of us, and I dare say it affected the members of the new community in a particularly harsh way. Congregations such as St. Michael's in Anaheim, where the vast majority of the more than 400 regularly attending Episcopalians who worship there every Sunday, they are Disney dependent, meaning their jobs are tied to the park or the businesses around the park. And they were out of work, or if they weren't out of work, their hours were severely cut back in this pandemic. This story repeated itself in other parts of the diocese as well, where a disproportionate number of people of color had their lives turned upside down in ways that we are still coming to grips with, including a higher proportion of people coming down with COVID, many of whom have died. Just talk to Juan Jimenez about the number of people he has buried out of St. Michael's in Anaheim. Through this time, the clergy working in Latino Hispanic ministry have gathered regularly to pray together, share what's happening, and support one another. With the brutal caught on video murder of George Floyd, the long string of similar senseless acts of violence against people of color, especially against members of the Black community, came into ultra-sharp focus for the new community leadership. The group came together and talked about their fears, talked about the pressures on this group specifically, talking about the economic realities, including the number of frontline medical workers in the group. We heard story after story after story about fear in the community as they realized a continuing and in many cases an escalation of active violence against people of color. A response from the group came in the development of a series of offerings for our whole diocesan community, Trauma and Untruths, Promises Broken in God's Name. An introduction to the Doctrine of Discovery. An introduction to racial identity. An introduction to racial capitalism was produced by the group in one approximately 2-hour block. Separate offerings for each of these topics for about 1.5 hours each were subsequently offered, doing a deeper dive into each topic. This work isn't done yet, and more offerings will begin in 2021, early in 2021. The reason for these offerings was really about educating all members of the diocesan community on the actions over time which have led to the realities the new community membership live day in and day out. Education and conversation can lead to the work of reconciliation, the acknowledgement of and the breaking down of systems of racism which plague our church, our nation, and our world. We cannot be the servants of the Spirit that our loving, liberating, and life-giving God desires us to be if we do not engage in the hard work of addressing the inequalities and injustices within our church, our society, and our world. This includes the work we need to do ourselves, acknowledging our own participation in racism and in allowing and sustaining inequalities and injustices to continue. Why do this? Why should we do this? Why must we do this? To become the beloved community that our presiding bishop so eloquently calls us to be. The beloved community Jesus calls us to be. We know that education is the key. And it's not only education on the history and current manifestation of racism around us. It is also about equipping our people where they are to be the servants of the Spirit, ensuring that all have access to quality Christian education in our Episcopal tradition. To that end, the Iona training program, under the very able leadership of the very Reverend Canon Greg Larkin and the Reverend Nick Griffith, have worked these last 3 years with many of the clergy of our diocese to educate and train a small group for ministry. They are graduating this month. The Lee Timoy Institute and the Instituto de Liderazgo, Lay Leadership Training in Mandarin and Spanish, are shifting gears and working on moving all their offerings to online video presentations, which can be used in all of our churches. This is a project offered in conjunction with Bloy House that will take a number of months to complete and roll out. So please watch for them in the months to come. Education and fellowship were also experienced virtually during this year, as the every other year gathering of the Latino Hispanic leaders and at Nuevo Amanecer, as well as the church-wide new community gathering, were both held, beautifully so, under the direction of our own Anthony Guillen, Canon Missioner for Latino Ministry for the Episcopal Church and the head of Ethnic Ministries for the Episcopal Church. Thank you, Anthony, for these great events. And our local H. Belfield Hannibal chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians, UBE, was fully present as well in the various national UBE offerings of Talk to Talk, covering topics pertinent to Black lives in our churches and communities today. As servants of the Spirit, the new community realizes our offerings will need to have a virtual component, even as we come back together in person, as we get all through the throes of this pandemic. We will continue to explore creative ways to share information with you, working closely with Canon Susan Russell and her team and the One in the Spirit initiative. As always, the entire diocesan community is warmly welcome to all our events, especially this one, coming in January for the celebration of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on Saturday, January 16th at 4 o'clock via Zoom and live stream. You don't want to miss it. Now, switching gears and looking at compensation for our diocesan staff and mission vicars and all of our priests and lay leaders throughout the church. In 2019, a group started researching our own diocesan resolutions regarding compensation. In 2006, we passed a series of resolutions regarding compensation. One resolution read, resolved that the 111th annual meeting of the church in the Diocese of Los Angeles requests that the bishop establish a commission to implement a compensation support plan to assist congregations with clergy compensation as standards of clergy compensation increase, end quote. The initial group started looking at issues of compensation and benefits parity, which focused on women clergy and was modified and expanded to include representatives from parishes, missions, and schools, as well as the ECW. Co-chaired by the Reverend Jane Gould and Canon Serena Beeks, this group worked this year to gather information on salaries and benefits for clergy and laity throughout the diocese, to look at issues of parity, and to make recommendations for changes or adjustments in salaries and benefits. Alas, the pandemic has brought this work to a halt. Although we collected about half of the data we needed, we know that the effect of the pandemic on the economy as well as your budgets is great. The early anecdotal data we were able to collect indicates there is disparity in compensation with regard to gender and ethnicity, and thus the vital need to complete this work is before us. To that end, we will be circling back this coming year to work with you again so that we will have a clear snapshot of what is happening compensation-wise for the diocese now. This will enable us to make recommendations as necessary to ensure parity throughout the diocese. While in-person visitations were canceled during the stay-at-home orders, your bishops figured out a way, as you navigated those waters ahead of us, to be with you virtually. I have my own series of blooper rolls in the recording of sermons at my home. Don't get me started. And I'm grateful to the very Reverend Peter Browning for dropping off priest's host in a Ziploc bag in my mailbox so that I can celebrate the Eucharist from my dining room table. Probably the most fun I have with the most interaction is on the live Zoom coffee hours after a service. While I can't be with you all in person, especially not right now, I love being with you virtually. I actually get to see more of you, and I talk to more of you, and you have the more opportunities to ask me questions. And by the way, the two toughest questions I received in all of the Zoom coffee hour questions, I think they were from 7-year-olds. So there you go. What sweethearts they were. So what strikes me is your creativity and love that you put into your worship offerings. Thank you all for that great gift. For 2021, we may end up once again having a mix of virtual and pre-recorded sermons or liturgies, along with the slow process of reopening our churches fully. We are reworking the visitation schedule for 2021 and 2022 so that those of you who were not seen in person in 2020 will have a visit from one of your bishops in 2021. We are doubling up on visitations over a weekend to be able to see you all. Now, on a personal note, through it all, I continue to serve on the board of the Church Pension Fund. I'm secretary to the House of Bishops, vice chair of General Convention Planning and Arrangements, and serve on the presiding Bishop's Council of Advice, as well as being the bishop visitor for the Autumn Cara Fellowship. All of these meetings have been virtual since the start of the pandemic and will continue at least through mid-year 2021. There were a number of ways the pandemic affected me and my family that I'd like to take a few minutes to share with all of you. As the pandemic hit us here in the Diocese of Los Angeles, my husband Steve was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the same time I was dubbed 11 years cancer-free from my bilateral breast cancer. It was really a surreal experience, as many of you watching this know, to literally drop off your loved one at the door of the hospital and say, "Call me when you're done, honey." Not being allowed to go in and wait for him or to be by his side when he came out of surgery. He's doing great, by the way. No further treatment is necessary for him, and he feels fine. Thanks be to God, and thanks to so many of you for your thoughts and prayers on that. I realized at the end of the first month of stay-at-home orders that I hadn't spent that many consecutive nights in my own bed since I became your bishop suffragan. Spending 1 to 2 nights per week, sometimes more, at the retreat center in Los Angeles, due to my schedule of meetings, it kept me away from home a lot. And I'm not even talking about my pre-COVID travel schedule to all of those meetings I talked to you about just a minute ago. Steve looked at our time stuck in the house together as a test to see whether or not I could eventually retire. Not that back-to-back Zoom meetings were part of that test, but rather that I was in the house that much every day. Apparently, I passed the test, thanks be to God. So in a few years, when I'm ready to retire or to go off and do some different work, we will be ready as a family. Another blessing was a daily 10 to 30-minute Google Duo or Zoom call with our son, daughter-in-law, and grandson every day. Steve and I got to watch Neil grow in front of our iPad eyes. Our son, Max, was the one who started me off on the joke of the day, a tradition I carry on, ending most of the meetings that I am in with a joke. Last but almost not least, we have the saga of the beach balls. Now, those of you who are my friends on Facebook have patiently watched these beach balls behave and misbehave all through the spring and summer. An initial dozen was purchased at the suggestion of our CFO, the Reverend Michelle Rackison, to try to keep the ducks from taking up residence in our pool. It worked. I soon noticed that they had a life of their own, so to speak. Okay, I'll call it what it really was. Pandemic monotony. Too many Zoom calls. It forced me to find meaning in mundane things, such as the beach balls. They love the Reverend Canon Ian Davies services. They literally line up in reverent listening. They like to dance around the pool to Irish music and 60s rock. I was then anonymously gifted with the 12 other emoji beach balls. I have yet to discover who gave them to me, however. If you're listening, please identify yourself. The suspense is killing me. 2 glow-in-the-dark beach balls were given to me by my birthday by my good friend. 4 Pokeballs and 1 Pikachu beach ball were given to me by the Reverend Peter Wong. And last but not least, a rainbow beach ball was gifted to me by Richard Allegre and Larry Spang, 31 in all. During the recent very high winds and fires here in Irvine, all but 6 of the beach balls were blown out of the pool and yard. What was I to do? Recently, miraculously, all but 14 made it back home to the pool, although a few of those have permanent leaks I can't fix. So you see, my pandemic silliness with the beach balls was a bomb for me, and from what I understand via Facebook, for many of you as well. One last mystery gift was the arrival of a few boxes of Porto's bake-at-home potato balls, as well as a box of cheese rolls. Absolutely delicious, but I have no idea who sent them to me. Again, it is killing me not to know. If you're on this Zoom, please let me know. I love and I have a deep need to write thank you notes. So please, please, please indulge me. So, my siblings in Christ, my last words to you are this. We have a very bright future ahead of us here in the Diocese of Los Angeles. We do. I ask you to hold on to each other and to your congregations. Be servants of the Spirit for one another, for the new people God is bringing to you virtually, for your diocese. We will all be back together again. Please continue your support of your church community and of our work here in the diocese. We are all servants of the Spirit together, always. As our presiding bishop says, God love you, God bless you, and keep the faith.